Hello, Galaxy. This is the question of the month. And the question of the month is, if you have a friend who is considering an abortion and she asks you for advice, what would you tell her? Now, in light of this conversation, I want to rephrase the question just a little bit. If you have a friend thinking about terminating the life of her unborn child and she asks you for your advice, what would you say? So that's what we're going to be discussing today on the question of the month. And I want to thank you for all your responses. Without a doubt, we want to continue to show our sisters, our daughters, our friends love regardless of the decision that they make. And so there are some things that as we talk today, perhaps you can bring up in conversation for them to consider as you are, conversating with your friend and giving her or speaking into her life. And I want to thank Erica because today Erica is with us, and we're going to have a conversation with Erica because she was nice enough and willing enough and vulnerable enough to actually come and share with us her experience with having an abortion. How do you refer to it, Erica?
I use the word abortion. Yes, whenever I share that information, I use that word. Yes.
Okay. And so we want to be able to take a deeper journey into understanding perhaps what's going on in the mind of this person that's asking us this question, so that we can help them the best way we can in love and speak into their situations, knowledgeably. So welcome, Erica.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to like you to walk us through that experience. Like, how old were you?
So I was 20 years old. I was a sophomore in college, and I was going to college away from home. And I was also on a softball scholarship, and almost all my college was being paid for through that scholarship.
Take us through your decision-making process then.
So, when I was late, I got a pregnancy test. I lived in the dorm, so we had one of those community bathrooms. So one of my softball team was my closest people. So one of the girls that I was really close to, she went to the restroom with me, and so she was outside the stall. So the minute I saw the two lines, like I just remember it happened so fast, those two lines, I totally just freaked out. Prior to that, I was not for abortion at all. I have vivid memories of being in Girl Scouts, making little ornaments that say "Save the Babies," and I was not for that. And then all of a sudden, I was in that situation. And again, this is like everything that happened, like all within that moment. All these thoughts are going through my mind. I didn't want people to think that. I didn't want to embarrass my family. I didn't want to seem like someone who was just going off and having sex all the time. And of course, then things were not, our culture was not so sexually, like everything wasn't just a go, so, it was, I felt my reputation. People would think that I was, screwing people just left and right when that wasn't the case. So that was everything that was going through my mind the minute I saw the two lines. And immediately I made the decision that I had to have an abortion. I did call my parents. And so my parents, they did come over to see us one weekend and talk to us about it, not giving us telling us what to do, but just kind of had like a serious conversation. But they didn't direct me one way or the other. Looking back, when my mom and I talk about it, because we do talk about it, she always thought that I would have the baby and then go back and continue college and continue playing softball. And I always just in my mind, like I would need to leave that college, go to college in Houston, live at home, go to college. It's not the life that I wanted to have. And then just didn't want to be seen also as someone who just was, so those are everything that was going through in a very short amount of time. Like It just all comes at the same time.
So do you think now, like, you created this scenario in your mind, that of the future that really may never have come to fruition? Because like you said, your mom had something else in mind, and she probably was going to feel like, okay, I don't want to pressure her, but this is what I'm thinking because this is my daughter. But I think sometimes as we make these, like, when there's this fear that we put in front of us, we create these scenarios that may never happen, which is, kind of what guides and directs us, which may not actually be the truth. You know what I mean?
Right. And we never talked about the what if I did, what could we do? we just didn't dialogue.
Right.
We just didn't
Every
dialogue
stage,
that. So
you're kind of like the person who's protecting the most vulnerable,
right,
right? They're your mini me's, and whether you have the child and give it away, for somebody else to take care of it,
right,
it's just that there's a stewardship of that little life all the way through, to the degree that we're kind of responsible for what's going on with that child. And so the idea of terminating that child's life is almost like a betrayal, because there's a trust that's being given to you, and
hmm
you pretty much kind of decide, I don't want to do that. And it brings up this thought in my mind about the biblical account of King Solomon.
hmm
There were these two ladies who were living together, and you probably know this. They were living together, and they both had little boy babies. And in the middle of the night, one of them rolled over, and she suffocated her baby. And then she figured, well, let me switch this baby out. I'm going to take
right,
the baby
right,
and give the other lady the dead baby. But in the morning, when the other mom woke up and she realized that the baby was dead, and then she looked, and it wasn't her baby. And so she's like, you took my baby. She's like, what are you talking about? And so she decides to take her petition to King Solomon. And so King Solomon's like, there were no witnesses. So how was he going to figure this out? He decided to he decided to say, look, let's cut the baby in half, and each of you get a half a baby and go about your way. But one of the women relinquished her right to the baby and said, you know what? Give the other woman the baby, right? That's okay. And the other lady said, well, you know what? Just cut the baby in half, and we'll just say half a baby.
right.
Now, from that reaction, can you kind of tell which woman was the mother?
Right, the one who doesn't want her child hurt at all.
Right. So there's this care that
Yes.
parents we are expected to have, and for the most vulnerable, because the baby couldn't say anything. It's got
Right.
right. And so looking back, what now, like what do you feel a responsibility would have been, in protecting, or whatever your responsibility would have been?
The responsibility I probably actually focus more on is, how was that supposed to impact the world? How was that child supposed to impact that surrounding family? Because that child had a purpose.
So I want to deal right now with a couple of terms. So thinking about the term baby, we have this concept that the negative 9-month-old is, not a baby. And in my research, I came across the fact that there was a deliberate public relations campaign to change the concept of it being a baby to a fetus. And of course, what it does is it makes it less human. It makes it like a
right.
It makes it more palatable when we're talking about terminating or killing something. And then when we talk about the concept of killing, I looked up, and I hear a lot of people say it's murder. I'm not debating that, but in looking up, the definition, to be technical, it's illegal. But we've made abortion legal, and so
right
now what we're doing, because it's still pre-planned, it's still all of that. So at this point, we can say it's killing. So
right.
when I say to a woman, if I'm talking to somebody and I say it's like killing a baby, how do you feel? Because it could be a necessary offense. Sometimes when we do things and people don't confront us, like last month our question of the month had to do with cohabitating, and that was something that I had experienced. And one of the things, Erica, I noticed is that I was cohabitating with somebody. I accepted Christ. Nobody in the church approached me. Nobody. And so it was like, it may have been a necessary offense for you to say something. Now, they did approach me about my little short pants I was wearing, but they didn't tell me anything about cohabitating. And I guess, sometimes you can be fearful, and how a person's going to react. But, when you talk to a female and you're saying, when you refer to it as killing a baby, how do you think that, that phrasing of what's going on is, do you think it's necessarily offensive, unnecessarily offensive?
I think the first time, I've only had one, but I know people have had multiple in college, like once they had one. I think that first time, in a sense. I did say that in my mind it was just a blob, but it's like something in you also knows. And when I did it, that they did not require the ultrasounds prior so that you hear the heartbeat. So I do think with me that would have made a difference. It was actually, I was actually having a hard time going through with it. Like I cried all the way up there in the office, in the front room. I was just crying and crying and crying. And deep down, I was like just hoping, I wish my boyfriend would say, well, let's get married. Because again, for me, having a baby out of wedlock, even though I knew in that moment he was not the one I wanted to marry, I just, like, if he would have said, well, let's get married, I would have kept it. But, and he drove me there. He was with me. And I was just crying and crying and crying. And the lady told me, if you don't stop crying, the doctor's not going to do it. So, I mean, I think deep down, that you are killing something. I think to me, what would make most sense in approaching someone is, again, there's been a lot of more things I've been exposed to later in my life with like through the pregnancy resource centers, like helping out with things like that. When they have those little models of the baby and like where they are in their stages and where they're at 6 weeks, because that's at least when I was 6 weeks was the earliest you could have it. And so it's actually seeing what it like, because in your mind it's just this pink like slime or blob, and that's not what it is. And so those actual, being able maybe to let them see that, or even just directing them to a pregnancy resource center. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but pregnancy resource centers, they're usually in the community. They'll do an ultrasound. It's, they'll do that for free. They'll just kind of educate you more on, if you go through with this, what you're actually doing. And
okay, so let's shift a little bit. I have heard people say that, well, I believe that it's morally wrong for someone to have an abortion, but I believe that the choice should be on the table. Like, it's wrong, but it's okay if somebody else is doing it.
I think that's justifying scenarios when the reality is there's a right and wrong is a constant. It doesn't shift.
Right.
It's never okay to run a red light. That's our goal. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's never going to be okay to run a red light.
Right.
And so when people go, oh, but they're in a hurry, and that's really how we justify it for ourselves. Like when we break these little you think about basic rules, and we justify why we can break them. But again, it's for our own selfish reason. Oh, well, I'm running late to work. Well, really, let's go back. Why are you running late to work? Because you hit snooze 5 times. See, nobody ever wants to go back to what was step 1 that created.
Right.
Nobody wants to focus on the cause and effect. They just want to go, oh, here's the effect. Now let's try and fix it and put the patchwork in, instead of going back to, because again, even after I had the abortion, I still practiced the same things that got me pregnant in the first place. Once you open that door, then it's an option. When it really, it's a false option. People think that this is going to make things better, when actually you've totally taken out a life that's supposed to impact your life and impact other people's life. And that is such a great value that you just totally,
So you have a good perspective in terms of, how it's going to affect the person whose life you're terminating. But people are like, well, but it's my body. Why does the government need to regulate my body? What difference does it make if I do something, and how is that going to affect you? And to go to the red light example, that you were saying, it's kind of like, when a person gets to a red light, what difference does it make? If you want to stop at the red light, you stop. What difference does it make if I run the red light? What does that have to do with you? If we are looking for something that's a standard, like it's going to be something that won't change. We're talking about, what the Bible says. Now, of course, we could quote Bible verses all day long, but there are people who don't actually adhere to the Bible. So then what we're going to do is we're going to get into conversations about viability, which is,
Mhm.
can the baby live on its own? When is it actually going to be its own person, its own human being? Where, we're going to get into these conversations about when does it start, when doesn't it start? And so, everything outside of the truth is going to be
Mhm.
an opinion. And so that's why it's going to be so hard to pin anything down, because really it's just, well, what I think, and it's going to be a matter of convenience. And you share with us, which is good, your mindset. And it's, I don't know if sometimes people are honest enough to say, basically, I was being selfish. I was thinking about me.
Right.
I wasn't thinking
Right.
about anything but me. I wasn't really thinking about this child that, but I think that's why, the truth and the standard is such an important idea, which
Mhm.
is why, when we're talking about the death of the most recent Supreme Court justice, people are so, at this point, they're so, well, what's going to happen? Because the composition of the court may change. And then, of course, what's in the back of their minds is Roe v. Wade.
Right.
Because
Right.
we're going to have to revisit this idea of killing babies again.
Right.
And so people are just kind of worried about that, because it's a violation of my convenience. And I hate to kind of pose a conversation like that, because I think that people have fears, and you don't want to discount their fears, but we want
Right.
to do is walk them through their fears and try to help them through that process, to the degree that, it's not just you having to dig your heels in because of what, we've been taught. I was teaching a Sunday school class
Mhm.
of middle school girls, and I had this young lady, we were talking about, I don't know how we got on the subject of abortion, and she was just so adamant that it's my body, and I know, just because she's in the seventh,
Right.
you got that from somebody. What have you
Right.
taught? I mean,
Right.
we're teaching the next generation, and like you said, what if she had been taught about the preciousness of life? So it's not just
Right.
this, oh, we don't want you to do this, this, and this. There are reasons, because if we can come back to the concept that, the law of the land is set for the collective, right? So
Right. Right.
you might not run the red light, but I shouldn't run it either, because as a collective, besides just me, there's somebody else to consider.
Right. Right. It's no longer just your body. It's the government steps in to protect the one who's not being protected. And so you've got to realize when the government's stepping in, they're not trying to control your body. They're trying to protect someone that cannot stand up for themselves, and that's a child.
So when we're talking about, what God says about who we are, there is this image that he has stamped on us as his creation, as humans, and he gives us value. And from the point of conception, like my hair color is determined,
It's everything is set.
Yes, and so I've existed from that point. You've existed from that point.
Right.
And so it's kind of hard to say, it's a blob when it turns into this beautiful Erica,
Right. Right.
Like, well, I don't understand why you don't see how God has created, just the process. And then we have been called to steward and protect, the most vulnerable little minis.
Right.
Yes. So.
Yeah. And I think for me, like when it really, like, I always believed in God, but I didn't become a follower or really understand what it meant to what I was really believing in. I really had no concept of what I was believing in besides Easter, Christmas, and so, the first time that I read Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you. And I might be saying that out of order, but when I read that verse is when it hit me that I made the wrong decision. So that was like a decade later when it hit me. I would say afterwards, it just like, okay, it was done and it was the past. And I just moved forward from there. And it was about a decade later when it all started to reappear, everything that was really suppressed. So when I read that verse is when it clicked that God, we would have been okay. Everything that I was afraid of, I didn't need to be afraid of. God's in control. And so I felt like had I had God to lean on then, I would have made a different decision. And
in general, Erica, just give us an idea of all those things that you're saying you kind of felt afterwards. The things that at the time you didn't realize what was going to come because of that experience.
yeah, like I just, I didn't realize that I was going to at some point want to be a mom, and that at some point I was going to have this realization that your career isn't everything, that family is everything. I mean, it took till my 30s, when God just really you see, you met your goal. This is what you've been working for, kind of, because I was not supposed to be in education. When I said I was a marketing major, and it just didn't happen the way I wanted it. So I did end up in education and end up being a teacher. And then my goal was to be a principal. So, when I met my goal, being a principal, I had a new school. It was the kind of school that I wanted, which was like a low income school that you turn around. That year, God just really spoke to me okay, you made it, Is this what's important? And you realize, no, family's important. I don't have kids. I don't, everything that's truly and really important, you're so focused on your work for yourself, it's really feeds your ego and your pride, and to feel like you've accomplished. And then, when you realize later, oh, I missed, in a sense, I feel like I threw my opportunity away. And every time I've been at a retreat, or I've heard other ladies give their testimony about their abortion, they've all gone through the same things. What's hard for me, what always stabs me in the heart, is they'll go, but God blessed me with babies, and so then it's well, how come I don't have them? But I get to hear a lot of testimonies of women that felt the same way. Some of them, they do go through a depression right afterwards. I mean, that didn't happen with me. It hit me much later. I have a perspective on abortion is about control, trying to control decisions you make and the outcomes that we know can happen. Everybody know, and when you don't like what that happened, you don't like the outcome, then you try to fix it. Right. And so, it really, I think about it a lot. I think about how old my child would have been. Anytime you see pictures, with family, how everyone takes the cute pictures now and puts it on social media. I don't have that. I never had that. I don't think I'll ever get to experience what it's like to be a mom, even though that's my heart. I would have been a good mom, and I don't. I made a decision, and even just with my parents, that's a grandchild. They should be grandparents. Of course, that kid would have been 23 by now. I would have actually already had a kid in college. That's, and I think about other women my age, that's their life. And I have such a, all those milestones that kids go through and you go through as a parent. I have no experience on that. And I don't think that I ever will get to. So,
yeah, you bring up a important point in terms of, when we're trying to fix things, the things that we try to fix, as opposed to leaning on what God says. So when we have this truth that God presents, I don't want people to think that, there's these hard principles that God presents us, but they're principles for our own good and benefit. And when we obey God, when we follow what God says, there's a provision that God gives us in that, and that, because he talks about in his word how he blesses obedience.
Right.
It doesn't matter. I mean, the kid, the child themselves, they're a blessing. That child is a blessing. When God gives life, that's a blessing. And so I like you said, I think there's this fearfulness of, I can't control what's going to happen.
Right.
Sometimes that walk with God, we realize we're not in control. God's in control. Right. And so for us to be able to step back and say, okay, God, what is the path?
Right.
You may not.
This was not my plan.
Right.
But this is not my plan. But I know that you're there, You're there in all
So what would you
situations.
say, like, if you're talking about how we sometimes our goals, our dreams are shaped, right? What can, if you're sitting down talking to a young lady and she's
Mhm.
doing this dating thing, what would you tell her in terms of like how does she shift? What the culture has just inundated us with. Like, how does she shift that?
Right,
My baby is important. I'm in college, maybe I'm not. This man doesn't love me. He's not gonna be here. It's gonna be financially
right,
hard. That's how women end up in poverty.
right.
This child, like, what is it? That you feel like, just in a word. We're wrapping up now. Like, in a couple words. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
you want to leave her with that says, you know what, the baby is worth it. What would you
right.
just share with?
Um, I think, I think I would just say it's what you're about to do is going to totally be life changing. And it's it's dealing an opportunity for you to experience motherhood, and that there isn't a perfect time to be a mom, and just to know the reality of what's happening is going to have a long-term consequence on you. Even if you go through with it, you're always going to feel sad about it. You may not right away, but at some point you're going to remember that you should have had a child. You should have, and I and other women that I've talked to that have abortions, you almost feel like you know what it would have been. Like, I always refer to it as a he. I know it. So you're. I think I would also point towards God. I think it's hard to talk about it without God, because I think you need to know, you know, God's in control. God will help you work this out. Um, because I don't think you can go through hard times and difficult decisions without Him.
Yeah. So, in wrapping up, just looking at statistics, I think the most recent ones I saw in 2018, annually here in the United States, there were like 876,000
Yeah.
abortions, and that's down from 1.3 million in like 1996. That's almost on average a million people a year. Like you were
Yeah.
saying, that we're missing,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would have impacted our world in some way. you know.
Yeah.
So that's just it's just something to think about. And I think that in everything that we've talked about is really
Mhm.
good information. And thank you so much, Erica, for being vulnerable and
You're
sharing
welcome.
really good information for us to be able to share with the ladies that we are sharing with. And I think one thing that's very important to remember is to love her all the way through the process.
Mhm.
If she decides to have a baby, if you're a friend, to be able to walk with her. She may call you up and say, I need somebody to babysit. And you need to be okay, not every time, I understand you might, but be a resource for her. Be there for that person who has made that decision to go against perhaps that thing that was immediate because she was fearful.
Yeah.
We are a resource. We are a community. We are supposed to be there for one another. So anyway, Erica, any last words?
I don't think so. I do wonder. So let's see. I graduated 95. So mine was probably 97, 1997. So mine was one of those 1.3 because I graduated, 95, 96, 96. I was in February of 97. So that would have, and again, at that time, they were not doing the ultrasounds.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if that has made a big impact, just being able to hear your baby's heartbeat, because it takes away that blob mentality, and it's false. It's not a blob. It's a living thing. So I kind of wonder, and later, just a little side note, probably a couple months later, my boyfriend and I had talked about that, and he did say he did want it, but because I had already made up my mind. So sometimes we just want to be in control so much that and really fear always kicks us into that. With any situation, fear makes us all of a sudden want to, like, okay, how am I gonna fix this? And sometimes we just need to go with what has happened, the decisions that we've made and the consequences of those, and learn from them, but not make things worse.
Right.
And think that we're fixing it, because you're really not. So
thank you very much, Erica, for giving us the time. Thank you, Galaxy, for for listening in, and we look forward to talking with you, or communicating with you, being with you next month on Gal Life's Question of the Month.